Is there a scent that takes you back to childhood? Well, you are about to meet an author who was so enchanted by the smell of lilacs that she named her memoir, The Smell of Lilacs. This is such a delightful, delightful book, and I couldn't be happier to introduce you to Michal Ramsey Smith here on Book Talks. Welcome, Michal.
Thank you. And thank you for having me. I appreciate that.
You're so welcome. Here on Book Talks, I'm Elizabeth Ann Atkins, and we interview the authors of Two Sisters Writing and Publishing. And Michal Ramsey Smith is our 33rd author that we have the honor and privilege of bringing her amazing memoir into the world. So I want to start by saying this book is so delightful. You have a lyrical way of writing, and it's just so fun and happy and joyous to read. We all need that. And it's absolutely delicious because you talk about food. So, Michal, can you start off by talking about your inspiration for writing this book?
Well, I guess it goes way, way back. It's taken me a long time to bring this into the world, but it all started back when I was a teacher in Saginaw, Michigan, Saginaw Public Schools. And we had this after school workshop that we had to go to. I didn't want to go. I was tired. I just wanted to go home. And interestingly enough, I don't remember the title of the workshop. I don't remember who ran the workshop. But in it, we had to do a short description of a family member. I chose my Aunt Marie. So I kind of quickly scribbled it down and I hoped that nobody would call on me to share. And when they
Uh-huh.
did, I threw it away. I balled it up, threw it away. But I kept coming back to my Aunt Marie and I kept thinking about her and all the other people in my family and in my life. And slowly, slowly, the writing kind of took shape. So that was the start a long time ago. And it was all about my Aunt Marie in 25 words.
Wow, 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 wow. And you organized the book describing your mother, your father, various aunts, uncles, cousins, friends, and it's so fun. But what I really loved, it's a slice of your adolescent life. Can you talk about why you chose to only tell the story during that delightful period of your life?
Absolutely. I chose it because at that time I was 10 and then 12 years old. And when you are those ages in the 1950s, there are rules. And the rule was when you're with adults, you never interrupt, you never join a conversation unless you are invited, and you never ever corrected. So, with that in mind, as a child, I was a listener and I'm very visual. So, I sat and I listened and I watched and I looked, and the memories just stayed with me all my life. So, long story short, if you know the story, the series MASH,
Mhm.
in that series, Father Mulcahy gives advice to Radar O'Reilly, who's trying to write a book. And he says to him, write about what you know. And that's what I did. And so I wrote about what I knew from a place where I had observed all these things. And then I just kind of put them into paper. And for some reason, I seem to be able to just kind of close my eyes and I'm in the place. And that's how the title came about too, because every time I'd smell lilacs, I'd find myself sitting on my front porch. So that lens makes you a watcher, and it also makes you not judgmental because you're a child, you see these things happening. Whether you think they're right or wrong is neither here nor there. You just see that and you don't judge them. So that was the good lens for me to do that. The first time was my sister was born, and everybody
Mhm.
could see that. The second time, she's now two and slightly different. I bring in the men and that whole kind of life. But it's a really good lens to look through because you don't bring a lot of baggage to it. You just look, you just see, you just hear. And so that's kind of how right now, if I close my eyes, I can find myself back in my mother's kitchen. That's just how,
Oh,
you know. And so
beautiful. So, Michal, the way you tell the stories of being in the kitchen with your mother, it's so much more than just preparing the meals for Sunday's feasts, which are delightful to read. Can you talk about the symbolism of feasting and nurturing and family love that you experienced in the kitchen with your mother?
well, my mother And all these women grew up, and then the men grew up in harsh times. And my mother's kitchen was always filled with wonderful smells and giant portions of food. They look at us and go, this is for 6 people, but it was for 2 or 3 people. So there was a lot of food, and everything was scratch made. So it all started from the beginning. And so I was usually with my mother when she went out to get the things that we needed for the food. And I was with her while she cooked. And so I learned to cook in pinches, dabs, and pours, because that's how they cooked. They never said, put a cup of this. They said, put a little of that, put some of this, put a pinch of that. My mother would smell food and look at it and say, it needs salt. I don't know how she did that, but I do the same thing. I rarely, if ever, taste anything. I smell it. And my daughter does the same thing. And when I sniff it, it's like, it smells right to me. So the way I learned to cook was simply watching. Then when I was 7, or I think, one of my mother had to be bedridden for a while. And so I learned to cook because in the bed, she would tell me, go in the kitchen, mix this up, come back, and she'd smell it. I'd go back. So I'd go back and forth for cooking. And so it was trial and error for me, but it was also looking and watching and learning. And so the kitchen was also a place where, and I think that's true in a lot of households, where you come together and we ate breakfast, lunch, and dinner in the kitchen, except on Sundays and Wednesdays. And there was always something going on back there. So you'd go in the house, you go back to the kitchen, because that's where my mother was going to be. And so if you were there and you wanted to talk to her, she'd talk to you around cooking this, making that, preparing this. So there were lots of conversations. And it just was a warm, nice place to be. It always smelled good. When my aunts and uncles came, they were always in the kitchen. They cooked from the kitchen. So that is kind of like a real good home space. When I think of my house, I think of all of it, but mostly the kitchen.
I love it, love it, love it. And there's so much more depth to that, because both your parents grew up in harsh conditions in the South during a very difficult era for Black families. And then the abundance of food in the house at the meals with the family and the 4 kids and all the, commotion, the dog. And it's like this richness that they're sharing with all 4 of you kids, that they didn't have as children. So can you talk about that? It's like, it's just felt like this tremendous output, like food is love.
I think so. I think because they grew up in times where a lot of times there wasn't enough food, that they always had way more than they thought you were going to have. I remember one Thanksgiving, my mother's had 2 turkeys, because you never know when you're going to need another turkey, but she was just that way. And I think also they grew up in a time where if somebody put something on your plate, you ate it. We did not have to do that. Mother had this thing where you could take a no thank you bite, but you could say no thank you. And so lots of times we just didn't want it. We just didn't have it. But if you put it on your plate, you had to eat it. So my Laura, who's in the story, always thought that was just crazy. They're kids, they should eat whatever you put on their plate. But she was really open about that she just wanted us to have everything we wanted and nothing we didn't.
Nice. Yeah.
But all 5 of us were raised that way.
Oh, that's so awesome. And I love the poetic or lyrical way you write. Like you talked about your mother's feet hitting the floor on a Saturday morning. And then you close that section with her feet being lifted off the floor into bed. The day is over, the last steps of Saturday. And it just gives me chills the way throughout the whole book, the way this rhythm is just so joyous to enjoy, to read. Can you talk about your writing style and how you developed it?
I've been thinking about that. I'm not sure what my style really is, but it's because I'm so visual that I tend to describe things so that you smell what I smell, you see what I see, you're having experiences. People who have read the book have said, I felt like I was in your mother's kitchen. And so I think my style tends to be a beginning and an end to each section in the book, but they all connect together. One For my style, for some of it, it just developed as I wrote.
Mm-hmm.
I started my mother's story because that's how she always started her day. And that's how that day went. And then I realized how it ended. It was almost like backwards from what she started in the morning. So for a lot of them, my writing style tends to be I start you out, I take you someplace, and then I bring you back home.
Mm,
And
wow.
try to include details because I'm so visual of how it looked and how it smells and how it felt. I mean, there were people, there was always hugs and pats and kisses and that kind of stuff. So I think the style would be take you on the journey, bring you back home, connect you to the next set and the next thing that stories.
I love it. So, as America's book coach, I guide people to write their book in 6 months. And one of the main things I tell them is write with your six senses: sight, hearing, touch, taste, smell, and the intuitive vibe or gut feeling of the moment. You do all of the above brilliantly. And it's just delightful because you do feel like you're there. You can feel the frustration, or you can feel the joy, or you can feel whatever's going on. And especially when you create your father's experience in the barbershop that he owned, and how he would regale the customers with his big stories, and he was larger than life. And oh my gosh, it's so fun. I think, Michael, this book is perfect for book clubs, especially people of your generation who can remember and go back to those happy times with their families and remember, yes, I remember those Sunday dinners. I think it's perfect for any reader because I loved reading it, but especially these kinds of books take you back to revel in the nostalgia and of simpler times in the family when you're a kid and you don't really have the world and grown-up viewpoint. But very importantly, Michael, you have 2 events coming up where people can meet you and get their autographed copy of The Smell of Lilacs. Can you talk about your events, please?
Sure. Interestingly enough, my first 2 book signings are at 2 YMCA's. I've always been associated with the Y, once in Saginaw, and then once I moved to Detroit, the Y here. They're really great kind of family places, and so I love that feeling, that atmosphere. So my first one is actually coming up on Friday, which is June 11th, June 10th? Yeah, June 10th.
June 10th.
And, June 10th. And for this one, actually, I'm having food, and we're going to taste a little bit of what came out of my mother's kitchen. And it's going to be from 11:30, I think, to 1.
Mm-hmm.
The next book will be in July 18th at the Saginaw YMCA. I'm excited about both of them, but I'm excited about the one in Saginaw because that's my home.
Uh-huh.
I see a lot of people who will know exactly what I'm talking about when I mention a street, a store,
Yeah.
the time. So those 2 are my first 2, and I'm really kind of excited about sharing it. That I know, and you're right. I too think it would be good for book clubs, and I think it's good for book clubs. In fact, I'm in a book club, and my book is going to be the discussion coming up next month.
Excellent.
But it does connect you back to your childhood.
Mm-hmm.
And what I found about it is that people who've read it, or even when I read it, it makes you think about your own childhood. It makes you think about small things that you didn't remember, but how important they were.
Mm-hmm.
One of my college roommate read my book, and she sent me a remarkable email afterwards. And she said it reminded her of things of cooking and things that she did with her dad, of still test milk, of the milkman coming. So it's those kinds of things. And it was a really nice memory that she was having. No matter what your childhood was like, there are times and there's spaces where they're just good memories. They make you remember. They make you, and I think you're right about that. It's generational, but it's also, no matter how old you are, you should be able to reach back to your family and talk about that. Our own daughter, Ashley, talks about things that she remembers from us as children. When she was a child, I'm thinking, I don't remember that. But from her view, she does.
Uh-huh.
Discussion.
Beautiful, beautiful. And it's really fun to read. Like there's a hilarious scene where you talk about your father making pancakes. And the way I think your uncle and his girlfriend or wife walk into the kitchen and there's kids and stuff and batter and it's just a mess. And they're like, what's going on here? But then they ate the pancakes and they were like, okay, he knows what he's doing.
My father cooked one thing, and it was pancakes. And the reason why he cooked that many is because the recipe he learned when he was in the Navy. And so it was this giant recipe. And I don't know why he made such a giant mess, but it was just always everywhere. There were thousands of pancakes that nobody could ever eat. So always leftover pancakes, but the delight to make. One time, early in my marriage to my husband, he called my father and said, how do you make those pancakes?
Uh-oh.
Giving him the directions to make that. And he looks at me, shaking his head like, there's no way I can make that. I'm thinking, no, you can't.
That's awesome.
The cooking in the story. These women were master cooks.
Mm-hmm.
And I could probably translate the recipe for you, but it's not the same.
No.
So about putting recipes in the book. But I just think, no, these are master cooks. You should leave it alone.
Yeah.
That's how come I still make them, because I am the holder of the recipes in our family. So I'm the one that remembers them. Very written down.
Yeah. Wow. Interesting. It was like intuitive cooking, without writing things down, just knowing, smelling and not even tasting. That's remarkable.
It is. They took what they had and they turned it into something really great. I know it is said that gravy, by the end of the week, gravy is mostly water, but it's the flavored water. So they took something and made it, and then made it last and made it good. And you ate it because it was good and you loved them. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So what's the biggest takeaway you have for readers? Like, what do you want them to walk away from after reading this book with?
A couple of things. One, when I talk about the lilacs and I talk about the fact that I rarely cut them down, because when you do, they wither really shortly and they'll die. So stay close to your roots. That's the first thing. That's really, really important. Stay in touch with your family, be a part of your family. And the other part is that, well, there's several things. It's about unconditional love. It is such a remarkable thing that I had that unconditional love from all these people. And so I would say love unconditionally. If you have family, just give them the love. It is a remarkable thing that you can wrap yourself in. And when life is hard, you just think about my family and who they are and what they are for me. So, and also reach back into your own heart when you read this book and find your own place in your family and in your life. So it doesn't have to be a big family, it doesn't have to be a small family, whatever your family is. And families don't have to be brother, sister, mother, father, cousin, because my cousin Martha in my story has a complicated relationship. She was my half sister's half sister, but she was always known as cousin Martha. Technically, I don't relate to us at all, but that family is always 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It is whatever a family is, and it lives if you bring your heart and your love to it.
Beautiful, beautiful. So are you working on a next book?
Well, yes and no. I have in my mind a story that I may come to write about my mother and uncle when they were younger. They talk about that family life often, but my uncle kind of gave me a small view into it. When their grandmother died, they went to live with my great aunt Sylvini. And he tells the story about how she comes to the cemetery and she's ranting and raving about this and that. And my mother and my uncle are 12 and 13. And they're standing, holding on to each other, trying to figure out what's going to happen to us next. And so I think that story needs to be told, but that's fiction because I don't know anything about it. So I'm thinking about making up a story, taking what I do know and creating something that is totally fiction. So I'm thinking
Nice, nice, nice. Well, I can't wait to read that because this was just absolutely wonderful. The Smell of Lilacs, a memoir. If you're watching and you'd like to meet Michal Ramsey Smith and get your autographed copy in Detroit on June 10th, the information about her book signing at the Bull Family Y downtown Detroit will be in the description box. And if you are in Saginaw, Michigan, her hometown, you can go to her book signing on July 18th at the YMCA. And the information again is here in the description box. If you are not in Detroit or Saginaw or can't make the book signings, please go to Amazon and order your copy in paperback or ebook, The Smell of Roses. The Smell of Lilacs, a memoir by Michal Ramsey Smith. It's just an absolutely delicious read. It's easy to read, it's quick, it's perfect for a book club, and share it because you will just feel happy as you're reading it. You'll laugh, you might cry, but you'll definitely have your heart feel warmed with the love and the feasting. Your mouth will be watering. So, what, Michael?
I do have one more thing.
Okay, great.
The thank you comes to you and Two Sisters Publishing. You have been so wonderful in helping me kind of make this happen. You're patient and just remarkable. I'm sure this would not have been possible without you. So thank you so much.
Oh, we are absolutely honored, privileged, and grateful to bring your amazing book into the world, Michal. So thank you so much. Is there anything else you'd like to share about your book?
No, I think you've covered it beautifully, and I appreciate that.
You're so welcome. You're so welcome. Well, I hope you have a wonderful showing at your book signings and that lots of book clubs pick it up because, again, they're going to just be delighted to read it and talk with you about your stories. And especially if they get to sample the food. So, well, Michal, I wish you the absolute very best success with your book. Everybody, please get your copy on Amazon or at her two book signings and leave us a comment. We'd love to hear what you think about the book, and also give us a thumbs up for the interview and subscribe to the channel so you can keep abreast of all the developments we have with The Smell of Lilacs, a memoir by Michal Ramsey Smith. Thank you very much for watching Book Talks. I'm Elizabeth Ann Atkins with Two Sisters Writing and Publishing, and I wish you happy writing.
Thank you.